Everyone, my name is Holly Stoneberg and I'm the Education Program Coordinator for Portage Park District, and I want to welcome you to our webinar for this month. The topic, of course, since today was the day that we scheduled our webinar for, what other topic could we cover other than Earth Day? So I hope you've been having a wonderful Earth Day and that you got some time outside in order to celebrate it. It started off a little chilly with that frost this morning, but then it turned into quite a beautiful day. So I hope you were able to enjoy it. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Let me make sure the chat is on. Attendees. Okay. So the chat's there. Feel free to throw your questions in there and I'll do my best to answer them. And we'll just move through the history of Earth Day. So, if you've been on our webinars before, you know I always stop here. If you're new, then this information is for you. I always start with our mission, but before I do that, I wanted to share this QR code, and that will lead you directly to the sign up for our newsletter. And that comes out the first Thursday of every month, and you get information on what's new and going on in the parks, as well as the education calendar and the highlights of that. Periodically we put out articles as well. So we like keeping everyone informed of what's going on in the parks and all the new nature stuff. So if you haven't already, I highly suggest you go ahead and scan that QR code, or if you just go to portageparkdistrict.org, you can, a pop-up pops up and it's the very first thing that happens. So you can sign up that way. But just so everyone knows, our mission is to conserve Portage County's natural heritage and provide opportunities for its appreciation and enjoyment. And that key word there is to conserve. And that's really the point of today. We want to not only keep Portage County looking like Portage County, but we want to make sure that we have these wonderful natural resources and beautiful spaces in order to pass on, so that when we're celebrating Earth Day in 100 years, we still have these resources available to the people that are around then. Okay. Hopefully I gave you enough time to sign up for the newsletter if you needed to. So let's get started. Of course, I'm going to start with Silent Spring. Hopefully you've read this by Rachel Carson. This was published in 1962, and it really got the ball rolling. And I wanted to start here because you might know that Earth Day started in the 70s, but that's not when people first started thinking about it. It's the first time we really took real action. But before then, people were already seeing the damage that was happening to the environment. And Rachel Carson was one of the people that brought it to the forefront. So she wrote this book, Silent Spring, and really expanded our knowledge of the pesticides that were being used and the dangers of it. And she really sparked public interest in seeing what was going on in the world around us and being more aware of it. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest it. It has some very interesting facts in there, and it's just a classic that I feel like anyone who's interested in environmentalism at all should have on their read list. If we fast forward a little bit and get to 1969, I'm sure we've all heard about an oil spill within our lifetime, but this is one that was pretty pivotal for a couple people back then. So in California, we had the Santa Barbara oil spill, and this happened in January of 69, and there was a junior senator from Wisconsin. His name was Gaylord Nelson, and others were with him, and they were able to witness this. And obviously, they were upset by it and from seeing all of the devastation that it caused, right? So just the numbers that they were able to count, they counted up almost 3,600 birds that died, and those were just the ones that they were available to count. But it didn't just affect the shorebirds, right? It affected a lot of the larger marine animals. There were deaths to the sea lions and elephant seals as well. And again, those are the things that they were just witnessing. That doesn't have any count for what was going on underneath the water and then beyond, okay? So for obvious reasons, Gaylord Nelson and the people he was with were upset by this, and they acted on it. So they decided to organize college teach-ins, which are like sit-ins, which you might be more familiar with. And this had been happening a lot in the 60s, right? All over the country, people were protesting the Vietnam War, and sit-ins and teach-ins were quite frequent. So what Nelson decided to do was hire a man named Dennis Hayes, who was an activist, and he wanted to hire Dennis in order to organize this teach-in event that would happen around college campuses around the country. And they decided on April 22nd, because it was between spring break and final exams, and in using that date, they would be able to attract the most amount of college students. So if you're wondering where that April 22nd date comes from, that's how they picked it, so that they could reach the most college students. If you have lived in Cleveland for any amount of time, you've probably seen this image, right? We're probably most likely all familiar with this. But in June of 1969, as a train was making its way through Cleveland, the sparks that was coming off the rail line went into the water, and it sparked the oil-soaked debris and the oil that was on the water there. So dumping into the river was commonplace back then for all of these large industries and companies that really didn't have regulations on what to do with their waste. So into the river it went, and you can imagine how damaging that was. I think one of the quotes I read said that the river didn't flow, it oozed, which is really disgusting to think about, right? And if water moves like that, think about all the life it cannot support, right? You need healthy oxygenated water, and if it's oozing, that doesn't seem like a very good place for all our river creatures to live. But as that train passed, it sparked this and it caught on fire. But the interesting thing is that this wasn't the first time that the Cuyahoga River caught on fire, and it certainly wasn't the only river in the country that was burning. Anywhere where there was major industrial buildup, we're having fires. So think about like Detroit and Chicago, they also had burning rivers as well. So what's interesting about this is that this happened in June of 1969, but in August, the Times ran an article and used this picture as the photo for their story. But the fire that had happened in June was comparatively small to the others that had been seen, and it was put out pretty quick, so no one really got a photo of it. So this picture that was run in 1969 was actually taken back in the 50s, right? So it was taken in 1952, but because it was so bad and it was put out to the entire country, it really caused an uproar, and it really sparked the environmental movement. So even though it wasn't the actual fire that happened in June of 1969, it was enough to get people interested. So during this whole time, from the oil spill to the rivers catching on fire, Hayes was working really hard to build a team and work on publicizing this event. And they decided that they no longer wanted it to look like a teach-in, they wanted it to be bigger. So he built a staff of over 80 people and over 100 volunteers, and wanted it to be a full-blown event. Again, they kept that date, April 22nd. And by the time it came in 1970, over 20 million Americans took place. So they came out to the streets, they protested, they were tired of seeing their living spaces treated like this, right? Air was considered, if it was like smog, right? It was a sign of progress, which is kind of backwards to think about. But people were sick of seeing the earth treated this way. So 20 million people came out to that first event in 1970, which is pretty impressive to think about, right? Because they didn't have technology and social media, excuse me, like we do today. So to be able to get this across the country and bring out this many people to really fight for the earth was pretty impressive. And even today, it's recognized as the largest secular protest in the world. And it's gone beyond the US, right? It's recognized in countries all over the world that want to take action. But that Earth Day really got the ball rolling, and we started moving forward. So later that year, Nixon laid out a plan that had 37 points, and he took them to Congress. And what they wanted it to look like was to consolidate a lot of the responsibilities in taking care of the environment and put it under one agency. And as I'm sure you're familiar with, that was when the Environmental Protection Agency was born in December of that year. We could see here's Nixon signing it there. In that same year, we also had the Clean Air Act come into effect. And remember, like I said, with Rachel Carson, people were already aware that things weren't great and we had things in place, but maybe they just didn't work as effectively as we had hoped, right? So even though things were in place, the Earth Day really caused the government to take a look at them in a different light. For example, in 1955, we had already enacted the Air Pollution Control Act, and that was the first federal legislation that involved air pollution. But mostly it was for research and trying to figure out what was going on in the air. Later in 1963, we had the Clean Air Act, and that was the first federal regulation that really took a deep look at not only research, but focusing on air pollution and controlling air pollution. In 1967, the Air Quality Act was enacted, and that started to expand the federal government and its activities in controlling the air quality. But after Earth Day and in 1970, when this Clean Air Act came to be, this is what shifted to expand regulations from not just cars in the interstate and that kind of pollution, but including the interstate, but also bringing in those stationary polluters like industry and focusing on not only how much they're putting out, but how to regulate them as well. So again, it didn't start here. We had some laws enacted, but it really got the ball moving to make it provide a bigger difference, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Moving forward to 1972, we have the Clean Water Act. We already had a Federal Water Pollution Control Act in 1948, but after Earth Day, it was reorganized into Clean Water Act as we know it, right? So this really helped clean up our rivers. It provided laws and regulations in order to keep industries from dumping directly into the river. And I think if you lived in Northeastern Ohio for any amount of time, you can see the progress that has been made. I think by the mid 1980s, they were already seeing progress in how clean the water was looking and seeing some of the organisms return to the area as well. Speaking of animals, the next year in 1973, they enacted the Endangered Species Act. And this was aimed not only just at protecting the species, but protecting their habitats as well. Because you and I both know that in order to keep organisms alive, you have to give them a safe and healthy place to live. So under the Act today, there's over 1,300 species listed that we protect. And the purpose of this act is to make plans on how to keep these creatures safe. And they also reevaluate species every 5 years. Jen and I just did a program and we were talking about specifically bald eagles and river otters, right? Years ago, you did not see those in Northeast Ohio. And now after the Endangered Species Act and us actively working to bring them back, it's almost commonplace to see a bald eagle, right? How many times have you been to Towner's Woods or to Berlin Lake and you see a bald eagle? I think I see a bald eagle every single time I'm at Berlin Lake, which is wonderful, but that wasn't the case 50 years ago, right? Same thing with river otters. Those weren't around, but now they're making a comeback. We have properties within Portage County that has river otters on them, which is so exciting to know that the work that people do actually does make a difference, right? So if we continue to protect and not only the organism, but the places that they live, they can come back and they can thrive. So it's worth it. I put this in here because I thought it was a feel-good moment, but in 1995, you can see President Clinton there. He was giving Gaylord Nelson, remember that man we talked about in the very beginning that got the ball rolling? They gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which I do believe is the highest honor any civilian can receive. And to this day, Nelson is recognized as the father of Earth Day, because he really did get it started. Okay, in 2016, you might be familiar with the Paris Agreement. So countries all over the world came together to sign this. Most of the groundwork was in 2015 and earlier, but on Earth Day in 2016 is when they signed it. So not only the US, but 195 other countries signed the Paris Agreement. And then the whole point of it was to set goals for countries all over the world. The main goal was lowering greenhouse gas emissions in order to hold the global temperature without letting it increase too much. Because we know if we go past a certain point, then we have issues globally. So if we focus on our greenhouse gas emissions, then we don't have to worry so much about the heat of the earth increasing that much, and then we can focus our energies elsewhere. But that was the main purpose of the Paris Agreement in a nutshell. I'm sorry, I toned that down a little bit. The main criticism of this, however, is that it's not really enforceable, right? So it set goals and countries have signed it to agree that they're going to work on it, but there's nothing really to hold them accountable. So that's one of the criticisms of it. But it is a start, seeing that so many countries around the world agree that this is an issue and are willing to at least acknowledge it and start working on it. It's a big step in the right direction. So just so you know, the US's history. So we did originally sign it in 2016. We withdrew for a little bit in 2020, but then we rejoined it in 2021. So currently we are still members of this Paris Agreement. In 2018, you might recognize this young lady. So Greta Thunberg, she started the school strike for climate. So she's a young lady from Sweden, and she learned about climate change and all of these things that were going on and all of the awful effects that were coming because of it. And her mindset was really like, why do I have to go to school to learn all these things about the world if I'm not really going to have a world to inherit, right? So she started doing these school strikes and leaving school every Friday, and then became this worldwide kind of climate superstar and really inspiring younger people to take notice. So she doesn't really pick one specific thing to focus on. She doesn't advocate for a specific climate thing we have to focus on, but her main goal is to get young people involved and educated and see that these things are going on, which is a big part of the battle, right? Okay. And then today, the 2024 theme is planet versus plastics. So I'm sure you've heard plastics are the bane of our existence for a long time, right? They're necessary and we need them to survive as humans, but we haven't really figured out the balance. Like, how do we keep them as a necessity and a useful part of our life, specifically like in medicine, but also not allow them to take over and be so disruptive to the rest of the world once we're done with them. So the Earth Day organization, they're demanding a 60% decrease in plastic use by 2040. That's a big decrease, but they're focusing on three things: the health risks of having plastics inundate our everyday life, single-use plastics, which we know can have negative effects on the environment and our health, and then the risks of fast fashion as well. So if you're not familiar with that concept, these are the things that like there's a lot of websites out there where every single day it seems like they have new things that you can buy, right? And they're pretty popular with a lot of the younger generations. But you can buy all this stuff, and then the next week you can buy a whole another load of new clothes and products. But because they're shipped so quickly and not made the best, they don't last. So these are things that continue to just end up in the landfill, right? And because a lot of our clothes now do have some form of plastic in them, they break down. So another thing that they're focusing on is microplastics, which is, if you can see in this picture, the way plastics break down and kind of inundate every part of our life. So even if you open a plastic water bottle, that breaking of the seal, right, puts these little microplastics within that bottle of water. And that's just one way that we can get them in our body. If you want to learn more about microplastics, I didn't know that this was this theme this year, but conveniently we teamed up with the Tinkers Creek watershed. And then this summer, we're going to do a program just on microplastics, so you can learn more about them and how they've inundated every part of our life. So make sure you check the schedule this summer for that program. It'll be at Trail Lake Park because that is within the Tinkers Creek watershed. But microplastics have been found everywhere from the top of Mount Everest to, I think they even found it in the Marianas Trench, which is one of the deepest places in the ocean, right? So they're everywhere. It's a really fascinating topic. A little scary, but fascinating. Okay. And then next year will be the 55th anniversary. And I put this picture here kind of as a joke, kind of not really, because we can say we're trying these things and we're doing really well, but unless we actually put in the work to make it better, then it's not going to get better. So there are a lot of great things that have happened because of this, but we do have a lot of work to do before it's great, right? So make sure that we're really taking a deep critical look at what's going on in the world around us and how we can try to do a little bit better. And then, of course, your Portage Parks, like I said in the beginning, our main goal is to conserve. So far we've conserved over 2,700 acres of land, and we do protect water in 5 different watersheds throughout the county. So that's drinking water for tens of thousands of people throughout the county that's being protected because we're able to conserve this land with your support, right? And not only that, but we also provide educational programming like this so that everyone can learn about the environment and then see how special it is and see how necessary it is to protect it, right? The education team here at Portage Park District runs on this quote by Baba Doom, and it says, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love, we will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we were taught." So that's really our goal. If we can teach people about all the wonderful things that we have, not only in Portage County, but in the world, then maybe they'll love them a little bit more and understand them. And then the end goal is for them to protect that as well. So that's our goal as we go forward. And that's the history of Earth Day in a nutshell. That was relatively short, but it's too beautiful of a day for me to yap at you this entire time. I would just challenge you to do something different, do something new, or just re-up on any of the promises you've already made to celebrate Earth Day, right? Maybe you can agree to rinse out your recyclables a little bit more. Maybe you can try a little bit harder to actually remember your bags when you go to the grocery store and not have to use the plastic bags, right? Maybe you can get one less coffee out so they use one less cup, right? So just think of little ways that we can help every day in order to make a bigger effect later. So I'm happy to stay on if you have any questions. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful Earth Day, and I hope to see you in the parks. Thank you.